There's a song we have on our first record called Beloved, and a lot of people ask me, where did I get the idea of that song? Because it's basically God calling us His bride. And I wish I could take credit for originality, but it just comes out of Scripture. All sorts of places God calls us His bride. And one of the most unsuspecting places we find that is in the Last Supper. At that time, they were celebrating the Passover feast, and Jesus is going through the ritual as a rabbi, and he comes to this very strange place where he picks up what scholars believe the third cup, the cup of salvation, as it were. And traditionally, you're supposed to just set that aside. But Jesus takes this cup and he offers it to them. He says, "This is my covenant, take and drink it," which was outrageous for several reasons. One, because Jesus is declaring, hey, the Messiah is here. And two, in that time, in that period, to a bunch of Jewish fishermen, when they hear him saying, "This is my covenant, take and drink it," with a cup full of wine, what they heard is, "Will you marry me?" Let me break it down. At that time, when a guy was going to marry a girl, this is what would happen. He'd basically go find his dad and he'd go, "Yo, Dad, this girl, man, I want to make little rabbis with her," you know what I'm saying? And so he would go to her dad and he'd go, "Let me give 40 camels for a daughter." And some of you go, "That is so barbaric and archaic. I can't believe that they sold off the wives." It actually wasn't terribly unromantic, because it actually was just the chance for the guy. He would buy the chance to ask her. She actually got a say in this, which is kind of cool. Because basically what would happen is they'd get the family in the room and all the relatives talk about pressure, and he'd sit down at a table, and the groom, he'd fill a glass with wine, and he'd slide it across the table, and he'd say, "This is my covenant with you. Take and drink it." At which point, she had the right. She could go, "Now you stink. You stink. You like hummus. I don't want none of that." Or she could drink it, and if she drank it, that was her way of saying, "I do." At which point, she'd go home to her town, and they would no longer call her by her name. This was cool. She was referred to as one who is bought with a price. A guy would go home to his town, and they wouldn't talk the whole engagement period. It'd be 6 months up to a year. The only way they communicated was the best man would basically run back and forth like a text messenger, you know, like check yes, no, or maybe. In the meantime, the groom is back at his dad's house, and he's building a mansion. Now, before you get excited, girls, mansion in Hebrew, this word that we see in Scripture, it actually means apartment, okay? And to top it off, it was actually an extension of his parents' house. Some of you are going, "Please don't let me marry a Jewish boy." It was called an insula, the family dwelling, and they would keep building onto it and building onto it. And what was crazy is the groom didn't even get to decide when it was finished. He had to wait for the father's okay, his stamp of approval. He was the one who said, "All right, it's done. Go ahead, go get her." At which point he'd go get his groomsmen, right, and they'd march into her town. She wouldn't know the day, the time, or the hour. She'd just be waiting up every day, like, this is the day. And they'd come in unannounced with their shofars, like little ram's horns, like and they'd come into town, and she'd basically hear it and walk down the stairs and down the aisle, basically. Does this run any parallels for you? Jesus says, "This is my covenant, take and drink it." At which point he says, you know, the disciples say, "Well, we've been with him this long. He's crazy town. Let's see how far the rabbit hole goes," right? They say, "I do." And then Jesus says, "Hey, we're not going to see each other for a while. But don't sweat it. My best man, my spirit, he's going to come and he's going to relay messages between you and me. That's how we'll communicate. In the meantime, you're going to go home and you're not going to know the day or the time or the hour that I come back for you. But you're going to be referred to as one who is bought with a price. In the meantime, I'm going to my Father's house where there are many mansions, and I'm going to prepare one for you." And none of us know when it's going to be, but the Father does. And when He tells me that it's finished, I'm going to get my posse, my groomsmen, the holy angels. They're going to blow their shofars, the 4 trumpets, and I'm going to come home and bring you home for the marriage supper of the Lamb. And what's unbelievable, if this weren't all enough, is that metaphorically Jesus is proposing to all of us. And He's not even proposing to a really great, amazing wife who's going to do all this amazing stuff for him. Scripture tells us that He brings this proposal to an adulterous, unfaithful wife. He calls us that in Hosea and Isaiah and Ezekiel, all over Scripture. So the issue isn't whether or not you're going to be the perfect bride. The issue is, will you take it? Will you drink it? Because the invitation is open.